What's going on, guys? It's your boy Ray coming at you live from somewhere, as always. And I wanted to wrap with you guys today about the coaching staff, about David Adelman and company, and just break down my thoughts on the year that they've had. And I'm going to give them a grade at the end. Without too much delay, let's get into it. Or rather, before we do that, make sure you check out the Nuggets Wave channel. We just uploaded the second half of the conversation that we had on Sunday, discussing a little bit more of what I think the Nuggets need as a whole going forward, along with Peter as well as some thoughts about who the Nuggets are as an organization. We got into that a little bit, but uh, focusing on the coaching staff today. So, if you didn't know, David Adelman is now the head coach of the Nuggets, and he just finished his first full year as said head coach. The Nuggets finished with the seventh best record in the league, the 21st best defense in the regular season, the number one offense by offensive rating and defensive rating, respectively, as well as the seventh best net rating. So, a pretty good team in the regular season. Obviously, the playoffs didn't go the way that we had hoped, but important to appreciate that in some contexts, the Nuggets were a successful team. And that's probably where we're going to start. But I do want to go down the list and just shout out some of the names on this roster. So David Adelman obviously is Malone's former assistant. In case you didn't know, there are actually a lot of assistants retained from Michael Malone's staff, including Andrew Munson, Obi Stojakovic, John Beckett, Elvis Valcarcel, doing my best with that, as well as new additions JJ Barea and Jared Dudley, managing the offense and defense, I believe, respectively. Mike Moser, who has been a Maverick Celtics Rockets coach, Chase Buford, Rodney Billups, yes, Chauncey's brother, as well as Travis Armenta, Sean Nolan, Cam Griffin, Ben Potts in the development room. So let's start with the overall picture and say that, good, bad, and the ugly. There is some good to be discussed here. I think that the fact that he has the backing of Nikola Jokic is a great start, in my opinion. In any case, if you have your best players support, I mean, you're doing something right, more likely than not. And I do think David Adelman did a lot right this year when it comes to being a little bit more open-minded. And one of the bright spots that I would point to, something I've been looking for a long time from Malone that did not happen under him, that's happening right now, is a reconsideration of Peyton Watson. I think we've all gave him a lot of his flowers for how he's played this year, but I think in particular I want to give David Adelman the flowers for, I guess, if I had to lay it out, my critique of Malone was always in terms of Peyton Watson, he- leaning a little bit too much towards pushing him to be functionally a big and playing him a lot at the four, putting him in the dunker spot, doing that sort of thing. Not that he can't do it, but I don't think it's the best use of his skill set. And so for David Adelman, I really am pleased to see Peyton not only playing a lot more small forward, but in particular playing a lot more shooting guard. And I think that's really the most valuable position for him because of his combination of length, but also mobility. And when you can keep that much size on the court, I think it's a recipe for success in a lot of ways. And that open-mindedness about Peyton, I think, and just embracing him and giving Peyton a somewhat fresh start, because again, a lot of these guys are retained from Malone staff. Obviously, Adelman is a former Malone staffer, so in a way, there's some continuity, but I want to give him that credit. And another credit I want to give David Adelman is that the Nuggets did deal with a lot of trials and tribulations throughout the regular season. A lot of teams, you can point to other teams like the Thunder or others that okay, they have guys who miss time. I do think more than most years and more than most teams, Denver lost more time from more of its best players. Talking about Jokic, talking about Aaron Gordon, who only played. If you told me Aaron Gordon wasn't even going to play 40 games this year, I wouldn't have told you they'd have made it as far in terms of the standings as they did, especially without Jokic for a time as well. And obviously, you want to credit a lot of the players for that, in particular Jamal Murray for showing a lot of leadership at the time, especially on court and in productivity wise. But also, I think David did a good job of navigating that with a certain level of poise. Now, talk a little bit about the bad. There are also some things where I was really hoping, I should say, for a sort of diversion from the Malone tenure. And in some ways, it was not. And one of the ways it was not it is that there are still certain players on the roster that I think are talented, that I think can play if they have a role that makes sense for them. But for whatever reason, the coach just doesn't trust them. And I think that is a very frustrating thing because it's so pivotal for Denver in their pursuit of another title that they're able to develop players and grow internally because, and this is going to become a running theme on the channel, at least for me, is that I don't have a lot of faith in Denver winning free agency. I don't have a lot of faith in Denver winning the trade market. But what I do think they can do is draft well, and find value where other teams might not have appreciated it. So when it comes to guys like Zeke Naji and Jalen Pickett, I think those guys, I was really rooting for those guys to also have a bit of a reset, to also have a bit of you can't even have a resurgence when you were never there in terms of rotational stability, that sort of thing, but to have an uptick in productivity. And I think for whatever reason, Adelman feels a similar way about those guys as Malone. And that's really unfortunate because even if you don't like those guys, the best thing for the team, for the organization, and not just for them, is that they can be playable enough that they look tradable, that they look okay. You can kind of see what the use case is for this guy. So it's a really unfortunate outcome that I think Julian Strother is a little bit in this bucket as well. Is that there are some guys that you were hoping might look a little bit better in a different environment, but they haven't. And part of, again, what I would point to is that to some degree, it's not that different of an environment. If you wanted a totally different inv reality, I would say you have to look for a different coach entirely, not just one of the assistants of the coach who is no longer here. You can't retain 4 or 5 guys from his staff and say that, you're going to do things different and everybody's getting a fresh start because the same biases that Malone was going to have against them. Well, I think Pete said something the other day along the lines of, he's not talking to a wall when Malone was talking about his own guys. And one of the guys he's going to be talking to or would have been talking to is David Adelman. And it really, for a team that really needed a point guard, for a team that really needed defense, for a team that really needed especially some help at the 4 and point spots, those two not playing is just a really disappointing thing. So I mean, I don't want to dwell on it too long, but it is a very, I do think it contributes in some way to where Denver ended up going in the playoffs is that like they were short a couple of guys and now they're going to Tyus Jones and now they're going to 3 and 4 guard lineups trying to scramble when certain guys were just unplayable in the mind of a coach. Some of that is obviously on the player, some of that's obviously also on the coach. Now, when you talk about the guys that he did play, I also think there were some mistakes, especially down the stretch, especially in the playoffs, when you're talking about how little I think Adelman was willing to use and stick by Jonas Valanciunas. It hurts because it's another instance of the Nuggets bringing in another center who ostensibly is a talented player who they put resources towards, and that guy getting very minimal, certainly a very minimal impact in the playoffs, but also even in the regular season. There were stretches where I think Adelman really wanted to go away from Val uh, in general when possible. And I just don't think it was always going to be the right thing to do. And I think it does put a lot of pressure on other guys to try to fill in that small ball center spot. And to some degree, that's also a team building thing. We can talk about the general manager probably next time. That might be the next episode. But as much as he had an open mind about some guys, and I do think he put some guys in the right position to succeed, sticking by Bruce Brown, I think ended up paying dividends for Denver. Putting Tim Hardaway Jr. in a position where all he really needed to do was think about shooting the ball. I think that was great for him in his year as well. Giving Jamal Murray the freedom and empowerment to kind of have the year that he had overall. All those things, very good. Spencer Jones, Cam Johnson, kind of stuck by those guys, and I think it paid off down the stretch, even if at certain parts of the year it didn't look so great. But when it comes to some of those guys, I think Tim, Tyus Jones in particular, those are just negatives for me in terms of how much they were utilized. Tim, I would say because he closed way too many games. Tyus because it probably feels like the safe call to go with the Tyus Jones, but at the same time, I think the more you play a guy like that, the more teams are going to realize that he's clearly a mark on a team full of marks. And I just don't think that that's a path toward success. It might be a path toward a higher floor, but it's certainly a path toward a lower ceiling. And if I got to transition a little bit to the ugly, I would say the biggest weakness of David Adelman is one of politic, one of charisma, one of presentation, and the ability to control the narrative around himself and then of the team. I think that's something that Malone did very well. Like if Malone wanted to run for mayor of New York, I think it'd be I don't know if he'd win because shout out Mondani, but I do think he has the kind of character that would do well in a political setting. And in a way, I don't like people like that. And I think it speaks to some level of manipulation of emotion and appeal and aesthetic that's not always tied to reality. So it's not the biggest deal for me personally, but I do know that a lot of fans are looking for a coach to make them feel better on the microphone and in meetings and in interviews and that sort of thing. And I think David Adelman had a lot of moments this year where he struggled to really impart that good feeling, that confidence in the players and certainly in the fans when you talk about that edge, even though, you know, down the stretch, late in the playoffs, back against the wall, I think he defended his guys with a passion and an intensity that I think means something to them, certainly because he is still around. And I think that kind of speaks to, again, having the backing of your players, even if he isn't the most individually charismatic guy. Even if he did do some things that I didn't like, I don't love the 2-3 zone. I'll be honest with you. I don't love the 2-3 zone. I'm not opposed to zone as a principle, as a concept, as an idea. But when you apply it in such a way where you're just going to a 2-3 out of just to get out of playing man, you know, just as a crutch, I think is what I would call it. That's not productive. Where I think where should I think zone gets productive is your ability to switch things up, to provide different looks, and to create ball pressure in unique and oftentimes unpredictable ways. I'm not opposed to them continuing this concept, but I'd really like to see them integrate more, just bigger variety. And even though it's not something you need every day in the regular season, in the playoffs, it really is. And having those things in your tool belt, I think, are really important. Having maybe you have a 1-3-1 press to go to at times. Maybe you can switch possession from possession 3-2 to 2-3. Maybe you can change how you manage who you put where and what lineups you put out that accentuate what a zone can do for you. And I just like to see more of that from David Adelman going forward. But yeah, I would say all in all, if I had to give you a grade, I'd say a B. Not the worst, but you could probably do better. Anyway, um, thanks for listening as always. Stop and smell the flowers, drink lots of water, and I will catch you next time.